Welcome back to Sunday Morning Cafe. It's been a while since we've been together in this way, but I want to make you aware when we're not meeting here by video, you can come to my sundaymorningcafe.com website, and there you will find reflections just like this that combine spirituality, psychology, family systems, and will have something to do with resilience, where you're likely also to get a story or two. Well, hey, our century just turned 21 years old. And boy, it couldn't come soon enough for me. And that's what I thought I'd hear from my clients when I would enter into conversations with them about how are you feeling about 2020 going into the rearview mirror. But I was surprised to get a common answer from people. Because here's what I would hear. Well, there's some things about 2020 that I'm going to miss. It falls into that category of 2020 silver linings or pandemic silver lining stories. So that's one of the topics I want to discuss today, is 2020 silver linings stories that we can get into. The second thing I want to talk about is something that comes up this time of year, just every year, not just this year, but every year. And that's the topic of New Year's resolutions. Surveys indicate that up to as many as half of us start a resolution this time of year. And those same surveys indicate that by the end of the month, most of those resolutions fall by the wayside. So I want to spend just a second looking at what tends to make a new habit take and stay. So a couple of things to look at. Don't rely on your willpower for your resolution. Rather, build a support system around that, even if it's just one person, and regularly communicate with that support system so that you can encourage each other and kick each other in the pants when you need to. And just because you make a mistake, it's not time to fall by the wayside, because that support system will pick you back up and carry you a little bit. A second thing is pick a resolution that's small enough, something that you can accomplish that's small. Thirdly, and this is kind of common sense, isn't it? Envision success rather than motivating yourself by failures, by putting yourself down and yelling at yourself. Try to envision success and talk positively to yourself about it. But I'd also like to talk about something that Arthur Brooks, who in his own right is a resilience researcher because he researches happiness. And I've said that before around here. Studies on happiness might as well be called studies in resilience. They go hand in hand. So Arthur Brooks points out, when it comes to these resolutions, a lot of folks fail to meet a resolution because it's not a powerful enough resolution that they would want to follow through on it. So losing a few pounds might be important to you, but for many it just doesn't have the kind of oomph to it. Happiness studies indicate there are a couple of areas where you might consider doing your resolution this year, because whatever you can get done in these two areas is likely to result in a decrease in depression, a decrease in anxiety, and an increase in happiness. What's the first one? Anything you can do to execute forgiveness pays off huge dividends psychologically and spiritually. There's something about our time right now where grudges are like a national sport. And we can speculate as to the reasons for that. But the burden it places on us to walk around with those grudges. Maybe you've heard it, I think I've said it here before, maybe you've heard this someplace. Holding on to resentment because you're not wanting to forgive someone is like eating rat poison to kill a rat. It doesn't really hurt the other person, but it does harm you. Another way to say that. Holding on to resentment is like holding to yourself something really unpleasant. It's like hugging garbage. For your New Year's resolution, can you let that garbage go somehow? Now, I know we've had conversations here before about some important ideas around forgiveness, like when you're sold on the idea that I want to let go of that. How do you go about that? Well, the first way is that you would acknowledge the pain of whoever's wronged you, or the folks that you are holding that grudge, to acknowledge the pain. Let yourself feel the feelings of it and don't trade it off. Let me back up for a second here. One of the reasons I think there's so many grudges being held in our country, have you noticed this? That when people are feeling scared or feeling sad, how frequently people turn that into anger. It's a really easy move to make I've noticed in my practice, men do a great job of that. When painful feelings come, men tend not to express those feelings in their pure form. They turn it into anger and express it. I'm pretty convinced that there's been so many reasons for fear and sadness in our culture that that's why people are gravitating toward finding the right people to hate to expend those feelings somehow. Rather than do that, feel the feelings of the pain. Just let yourself do that. A second procedure, whatever you can do to empathize with and understand the person that's wronged you or the people that wronged you, to empathize and understand, even if it looks like this. That person who's acting that way has got a wound inside of them, and I wouldn't want to have to be them to walk around feeling that way. Even somebody like with a personality disorder like narcissism, to grow up with no sense of self and needing to be the center of attention, imagine the pain of that. So if you can make that move to empathy and understanding of the person who's harmed you, tremendously valuable to move toward forgiveness. When it comes to forgiveness, see if you can forgive from your mind as well as your body. What do I mean by that? From your mind, to make that decision to say this, I forgive this person, and whenever that thought comes back up of how they've harmed you, or you catch yourself in that internal dialogue, to have some way in your mind to say, I let that go, or I surrender my right to hold that grudge, or even to say to myself, I forgive that person. For those of you with a spiritual tradition, you might have a prayer that goes with it. God, I surrender that to you. I surrender my right to do that. Exercise that surrender muscle, my right to hang on to that grudge. See if that letting that garbage go doesn't help. Finally, how do I forgive from my body? Feel in your body where you carry that grudge. When you feel that tension in your stomach, tense those muscles and breathe down into that space like you learned in yoga. And then breathe out that contempt. Breathe it out, breathe it away from yourself. And conclude that little exercise by softening your body and your chest, your belly, your shoulders, by breathing out goodwill toward that person in your mind's eye, surrounding them in light and love. The second thing that Arthur Brooks talks about is something we've discussed here many times. Sometimes it goes by the name beauty checks. Sometimes I've gone by stop, drop, and savor. But any kind of exercise where you can execute gratitude on a daily basis. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of things in life that you can't feel grateful for because they suck. But in any given moment, you can find something to feel grateful for and spend time with that. One way to do this here on the 2nd of January is that you can sit down and write 5 things for which you're grateful, and every week add 2 things to that list. Spend some time every day in reflection on what you feel grateful for, going back to the list you already have, thinking of new things, add them to your list, and see come June what you've compiled and reflect back on that. See what kind of difference that makes for you. Now, those are some ideas about New Year's resolutions. But I want to shift gears to what I surfaced in the beginning of our session. COVID silver linings, pandemic silver linings, 2020 silver linings. Because again, to simply hold on to resentment about 2020 is not a resilient move. To take our gratitude back into 2020. I had this conversation New Year's Eve with my kids as a way to construct this video. And we came up with some things. Here's a COVID silver lining that I could bring up. One would be all the times that we've met outdoors with people where we otherwise wouldn't. A deeper appreciation for the outdoors. As a therapist, I couldn't meet in an office since March. So I've been meeting over in a park underneath a tree. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to miss that when I get back to an office. It's kind of nice to have a little breeze talking to people outdoors from 10 feet apart. More 2020 silver linings. I've noticed there's something about a pandemic that makes you forget about the bullshit. What I mean by that is, it's become cool to be vulnerable. These days, people will ask how you're doing and they really want to hear the answer. And you're likely to hear something from them that's not all polished up, where somebody might say, here's where my mood got wonky. Here's where I haven't slept so well. And people are willing to be more vulnerable from each other. Along those lines, I'm remembering at the beginning of COVID when I was talking to my friend Don and we parted company and I said, okay, Don, you stay safe. You too, Tom. See you later. And I thought, that's bullshit. So I picked up the phone and I dialed the number again. I said, Don, here's what I really wanted to tell you. I love you, and I don't want to take you for granted. And what do you think he said back to me? Was there an awkward silence? And he said, well, that's unfortunate. No, Don says, I love you too, Tom. So what are those, if you want to have a great conversation that goes to that deeper level with your family or friends, what are your 2020 silver lining stories that you want to tell? Here's another question you can ask that'll go to a deeper place. What are some experiences from 2020 that you want to hold on to and you don't want to forget about? Here's one I'm thinking of. My neighbors and I got on our front porches and had a few sing-alongs early on in the pandemic. Lots of fun. Couple of them, I'm thinking of one memory where from across the street, we're singing that Neil Diamond song, hands touching hands, we're reaching across the street and having a virtual touch. Just a lot of fun, and it felt like we're taking something back from that pandemic. Another memory I'm just going to have is having all my kids live at home with me and commute to work virtually. When they moved out after 3 months of being together, I strung a line in our bathroom with towels for each person's hands back when I was worried that touching the same towel might communicate disease. And I put their names over it. When they all moved away, I couldn't bear to take the towels down, so they still sit in that bathroom holding on to that memory because I don't want to let that go. What are some experiences for you? My daughter, when she went to graduate school this summer and she was going to leave, she put together a party where people would come a few at a time so we could keep distance and not spread disease. But having those little more intimate gatherings of a few people at a time instead of a crowd of people was sweet. I don't want to let that memory go. A third thing that you could have a deeper conversation about 2020. What's something you want to take with you out of 2020, like a new habit, a new understanding? Maybe just this: I made it through a pandemic. I'm kind of badass, maybe just that. But what is that thing that you want to take from 2020 and bring into the new year and maybe make that a part of your life? Here's my answer to that question. Something I want to take into this New Year's is you. I have really enjoyed, I never knew I would, coming with you and having these reflections back and forth, hearing your reflections back to me, some because you've typed me out a response, some because you've contacted me and had things to say, but even just the experience of being here with you has been a blessing to me. And so next week, I'll either see you back here again for our meeting this way visually, or I'll see you in an article that we'll put together and have a reflection that way. But either way, Happy New Year.